The conclusion should be the easiest and least stressful part of the conclusion. So if you're thinking too hard, stop, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and just relax and write. If it's not the greatest thing in the world, we can always fix it up when we edit. So the conclusion is essentially a reworking of our introduction. It's actually sort of the introduction backwards. If we started with the introduction, we had our context that we worked on at the beginning, sometimes called the hook or attention grabber, but I don't like to use those words. Then we get to the background information that we needed, and then we get more specific to what we're specifically saying. So it's like general statement about the world, statements about the story, specific thing about the story. The conclusion is the opposite. Specific thing about the story, recapping some of our bigger information, and then connecting it to the world or making some kind of connection to the future or a statement about literature. The third part might sound intimidating for right now, but I'm going to go over it with you to make it as least intimidating as possible. So again, in other words, kind of the way we've been doing this before, restate your thesis in different words. Summarize your main points, expand the conversation, discuss your essay's purpose in general terms. So here's my restated thesis. I posted my original thesis up here, as you can see, and my restated one right here. So my original thesis, if you don't recall, is while both Harrison Bergeron in 1984 examined the horrors of dystopian society, Harrison Bergeron relies on humor to demonstrate the unlikeliness of such a society ever coming to fruition. And 1984 uses imagery and lifelike setting description to show how close our society already is to it. I'm going to rework this. And one of the things I'm going to do is, if you notice at the top here, I talked about how they're the same, and then at the bottom I talked about how they're different. Well, what if I summarized how they're different up here and how they're the same below? Mr. Raza would never know. Also notice how at the beginning I used the word while, and restated I used the word although. They are functionally doing the same thing, they're just different words. It's one of those things that writers of essays do all the time. They just restate things to make it clean and make it look nice, and a reader would never really pay attention to something like that anyway. So I'm going to read my restated thesis. And before I do, I want to emphasize that I don't have to cover every little piece of this giant thesis. You already read a whole essay on it. You're probably sick of hearing about all the little intricate details. Plus, whatever I don't address, I can always bring up in the next part. So here's my nice, clean, restated thesis. Although each story presents different ideas about the likelihood of a dystopian society, both Harrison Bergeron in 1984 do recognize and establish what a true dystopian society would look like. So again, I flipped. Up here was what they did the same, what they did differently. Now I did what they did differently, what they did the same. No big deal. Okay. Then we want to summarize our main points. I kept my first part up here, just so you can see how it fits in. But in one sentence, I basically just summarized the main point, and I'm not really focusing on any specifics. You already read about the specifics. You probably don't want to read any more about it. As you can see, I'll start from the thesis, and then I'll go into the next part. So, thesis restated. Although each story presents different ideas about the likelihood of a dystopian society, both Harrison Bergeron and 1984 do recognize and establish what a true dystopian society would look like. Now my new part. In Harrison Bergeron, Vonnegut uses a humorous tone to describe the setting and peppers in unbelievable plot points to show how silly this vision is, while George Orwell decorates a lifelike London with vivid imagery to make the reader feel that a dystopian society is not only possible, but probable. End. Just one sentence. And now my final point. So you have a few options here. Please do not do all of them. Just choose one. And this should really be done in a sentence or two. I think mine is actually 3 sentences, but don't pay attention to me. Just make it in 2 sentences. So something you can do is explain the relevance of your topic. Again, you can go back to those synthesis questions. Remember how you were only supposed to choose one of the 4 synthesis questions? Choose another one. Or you can suggest avenues of further research or discussion. Since I've already done 1 and 2 in other examples, I'm going to do 3 just to show you what 3 would look like. Now again, you don't have to do exactly what I do. You can go back and do 1 or the other 2. Most of you, I imagine, would do number 2 because you probably already prepared something. And that's not a bad idea. So here's option 3. The real world may create literature, but in some ways, literature also creates our world. Deep, I know. If our vision of dystopia is affected by reading Harrison Bergeron in 1984, it is then important to read other authors with different visions of the future so we can develop a more expansive imagination and perception of our own world. Nice, I got it done in 2 sentences. So let's put it all together. Notice it's a very short paragraph. Well, short for me at least. Although each story presents different ideas about the likelihood of a dystopian society, both Harrison Bergeron and 1984 do recognize and establish what a true dystopian society would look like. In Harrison Bergeron, Vonnegut uses a humorous tone to describe the setting and peppers in unbelievable plot points to show how silly this vision is, while George Orwell decorates a lifelike London with vivid imagery to make the reader feel that a dystopian society is not only possible, but probable. The real world may create literature, but in some ways, literature also creates our world. If our vision of a dystopia is affected by reading Harrison Bergeron and 1984, it is then important to read other authors with different visions of the future so we can develop a more expansive imagination and perception of our world. That's it. I cannot reiterate enough. Do not worry about the conclusion too much. Don't let it stress you out. Just write it. If it's not great, we'll fix it later. Enjoy. Thank you for watching my video.